The howling wind carried Emma Anderson's desperate sobs as she fled across the moonlit prairie, her once pristine dress now torn and mudded from her frantic escape. It was 1875 in the unforgiving Wyoming Territory, and at 22, Emma had never imagined she would be running for her life on this cold October night, driven from the only home she'd known since arriving out west. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath as she stumbled over the rocky terrain. Behind her, the orange glow of flames illuminated the night sky, her small homestead, the one she'd worked so hard to build after her parents' passing, now reduced to cinders by the men who'd claimed she had no right to the land. They'd come with torches and threats, forcing her to flee with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket clutched in her trembling hand. The darkness seemed to close in around her as Emma pushed forward, having no destination in mind beyond escape. Her honey blonde hair whipped across her face, blinding her momentarily as she crested a small hill. When she looked up again, her heart leapt in the distance. A small pinprick of light flickered against the vast blackness of the prairie night. Hope surged through her veins, giving her renewed strength as she adjusted her course toward the light. Perhaps there she might find shelter, or at least a moment's respite from the biting wind and the fear that had become her constant companion. As Emma drew closer, the light revealed itself to be a modest cabin nestled against a cluster of cottonwood trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. Her pace quickened despite her exhaustion, but she froze when the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the night air. "That's far enough, stranger," a deep voice called out from the shadows. "State your business or turn back the way you came." Emma raised her hands instinctively, squinting to make out the figure standing on the cabin's small porch. "Please," she called, her voice breaking. "I mean no harm. My home. They burned it. I have nowhere to go." A moment of silence stretched between them before the figure lowered the rifle. There was the sound of a match being struck, and then the warm glow of an oil lamp illuminated the face of a man who appeared to be in his late 20s. His features were striking, strong jawline partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble, intense eyes studying her with caution, and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "You're bleeding," he observed, his voice softer now as he raised the lamp higher to better see her. Emma glanced down, noticing for the first time the cut on her arm where she'd scraped against a tree branch during her flight. "I didn't realize," she murmured, suddenly aware of how disheveled and desperate she must appear. The man hesitated only briefly before stepping down from the porch, the lamp casting long shadows as he approached. "Name's Yates Sullivan," he said, stopping a respectful distance from her. "Most folks just call me Sully." "Emma Anderson," she replied, swaying slightly as the adrenaline that had carried her this far began to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Sully noticed her unsteadiness and moved closer, concern replacing suspicion in his gaze. "Miss Anderson, you look about ready to collapse. Come inside before you freeze out here." He turned, lifting the lamp to light their way, and gestured for her to follow. Emma hesitated only a moment. She knew nothing of this man beyond his name, but the alternative was the cold, unforgiving night and the possible return of those who had driven her from her home. "Thank you," she whispered, following the steady light of his lamp as he led her toward the cabin. The interior was modest, but well kept, a single room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a narrow bed in the corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a small cooking area. The fire cast dancing shadows across the wooden walls, which were adorned with a few simple implements: a coiled rope, a saddle hung on pegs, and a rifle rack. "Sit," Sully instructed, gesturing to one of the chairs as he placed the lamp on the table. "I'll get something for that cut." Emma sank gratefully into the chair, her muscles aching from her desperate flight. She watched as Sully moved with quiet efficiency, retrieving a metal basin, a cloth, and a small bottle from a trunk near the bed. "It's not much," he said, nodding toward their surroundings as he set the items on the table. "But it keeps the weather out and the warmth in." "It's more than I have now," Emma replied softly, a fresh wave of grief washing over her as the reality of her situation settled in her chest like a physical weight. Sully paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "What happened?" Emma winced as he poured water into the basin and gently took her arm, beginning to clean the cut with careful movements. "A man named Hargrove claims he has the deed to my land," she explained, her voice steadier than she felt. "He's been trying to force me out for months. Tonight, he came with 3 others. They set fire to my barn first, said it was a warning." Her voice caught. "When I tried to stand my ground, they lit the house. Said a woman has no business trying to work a homestead alone, and that next time they wouldn't just burn the buildings." Sully's jaw tightened, his hands pausing momentarily in their task before resuming with gentle precision. "Hargrove," he repeated, a note of recognition in his voice. "Thaddeus Hargrove," Emma nodded. "You know him." "Of him," Sully corrected, his expression darkening. "He's been buying up land all over the territory, one way or another. Not always legally, from what I hear." "My parents died of fever last winter," Emma said, looking down at her hands. "The homestead was supposed to be mine. All the papers were in order, but Hargrove claims my father sold it to him before he died." She shook her head. "It's a lie. My father would never have sold our land, especially not to a man like Hargrove." Sully finished cleaning her wound and began applying a salve that smelled of herbs and beeswax. "Hargrove has the territorial judge in his pocket," he said quietly, "and the sheriff won't cross him. He's not a man who takes kindly to being opposed." "I'm learning that," Emma replied bitterly. Sully wrapped a clean strip of cloth around her arm, securing it with a neat knot. His fingers lingered for just a moment longer than necessary, and when Emma looked up, she found his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You can stay here tonight," he said, breaking the moment as he stood and moved to a chest in the corner. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." "I can't impose," Emma began, but Sully cut her off with a shake of his head. "It's not an imposition," he insisted, pulling a clean shirt from the chest and offering it to her. "You can change behind that screen." He nodded toward a simple wooden folding screen in the corner. "I'll sleep by the fire." Emma accepted the shirt, acutely aware of the state of her own clothing torn, smoke-stained, and mudded from her flight. "Thank you," she said again, clutching the garment to her chest. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't seen your light." A ghost of a smile crossed Sully's features. "Then I'm glad I lit it." He turned away, busying himself with building up the fire as Emma moved behind the screen to change. The shirt was far too large, hanging nearly to her knees, but it was clean and smelled faintly of soap and open air. Emma emerged from behind the screen, feeling suddenly shy as Sully looked up from the fire. His expression softened almost imperceptibly, but he quickly turned back to his task. "There's stew left from supper," he offered. "You should eat something." The mention of food reminded Emma that she hadn't eaten since midday, and her stomach responded with an audible growl that brought a flush to her cheeks. Sully didn't comment, simply moving to the small stove to reheat the stew. As Emma settled back in the chair, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. The events of the night seemed almost dreamlike now, viewed from the safety of this warm cabin with its solid walls and the steady presence of this quiet, competent man. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own troubled thoughts. Sully glanced over his shoulder. 5 years this winter, he answered. Came out after the war, needed the quiet. Emma nodded, understanding without him having to elaborate. Many men had sought the solitude of the frontier after the war between the states, carrying wounds both visible and hidden. And before that, she pressed gently. Virginia, he said after a pause, had a farm, families gone now. The simplicity of his answer told Emma there was more to the story pain he chose not to share with a stranger. She didn't press further, respecting his reticence. Sully brought her a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread, setting them before her without ceremony. "It's not fancy," he warned. Emma didn't care. The stew was hearty, filled with chunks of venison and wild onions, and the bread, though a bit stale, helped fill the hollow ache in her stomach. She ate slowly, aware of Sully watching her from his position by the fire. "What will you do now?" he asked finally, voicing the question she'd been avoiding. Emma set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly diminished. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I had was in that house. The money from my parents' savings, my father's watch, my mother's Bible." Her voice caught. "All gone now." "You have family elsewhere?" Sully asked, his tone carefully neutral. Emma shook her head. "My mother's sister lives in Boston, but we haven't spoken in years. She didn't approve when my parents decided to come west." A bitter smile touched her lips. "She'd say she was right all along." Sully nodded, his expression thoughtful. "There's the settlement at Pine Creek, about a day's ride from here. Might be work there." "Perhaps," Emma agreed, though the prospect filled her with dread. A single woman with no money and no connections would have few options in a frontier settlement, none of them particularly appealing. Sully seemed to read her thoughts. "You could stay here a few days," he offered, his voice carefully casual, "until you decide what to do." Emma looked up, surprised by the offer. "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition," Sully interrupted, his gaze steady. "I've got the space and winter's coming on. Not a good time to be traveling without preparations." He shrugged. "Besides, could use the help around here. Place could do with a woman's touch." The last part was said with the faintest hint of a smile, and Emma found herself smiling back despite everything. "If you're sure," she said cautiously. "I can cook and clean, and I'm handy with a needle. I could mend your things in exchange for your hospitality." Sully nodded, as if the matter was settled. "Get some rest now," he said, gesturing toward the bed. "We'll talk more in the morning." Emma hesitated, glancing at the narrow bed. "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will," Sully insisted, already spreading a bedroll before the fire. "You've had a harder day than most. Sleep while you can." Too exhausted to argue further, Emma made her way to the bed, sinking onto the straw-filled mattress with a grateful sigh. The blankets were worn but clean, and as she pulled them around herself, she was enveloped in that same scent of soap and open air that clung to Sully's shirt. From her position on the bed, she watched as Sully moved about the cabin, banking the fire for the night and extinguishing all but one small lamp. His movements were deliberate and efficient, speaking of years of self-reliance. "Mr. Sullivan," she called softly as he settled onto his bedroll. He looked up, his face half in shadow. "Sully," he corrected. "Sully," Emma amended. "Thank you for everything." He held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "Get some sleep, Miss Anderson." "Emma," she insisted gently. "If I'm to call you Sully, then you must call me Emma." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Emma, then," he agreed, his voice wrapping around her name in a way that made her heart beat just a little faster. "Good night." "Good night," she whispered back, allowing her eyes to close at last. As she drifted toward sleep, Emma was distantly aware of the sounds of the cabin settling around her, the crackle of the fire, the low moan of the wind outside, and the steady, reassuring rhythm of Sully's breathing across the room. For the first time since fleeing her burning home, she felt something like safety steal over her, and with it came the blessed release of dreamless sleep. Dawn broke with a gentle persistence that filtered through the cabin's small windows, casting strips of golden light across Emma's face. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she opened her eyes to unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous night rushed back: the fire, her desperate flight, and the stranger who had offered her sanctuary. Emma sat up, pushing back the blankets and glancing around the cabin. Sully was nowhere to be seen, but the fire had been rebuilt, and a pot of coffee simmered on the stove. Her dress, which she'd left draped over the screen the night before, had been cleaned as best as possible and hung near the fire to dry. She rose and quickly dressed, grateful that someone, Sully, presumably had made an effort to remove the worst of the mud and soot from the fabric. It was still torn in places, but it was wearable. She folded his borrowed shirt neatly and placed it on the bed before moving to pour herself a cup of coffee. The cabin door opened, and Sully stepped inside, carrying an armload of firewood. He paused when he saw her standing by the stove, a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or satisfaction crossing his features before his expression settled back into its usual reserve. "You're up," he observed, closing the door with his foot and moving to stack the wood beside the fireplace. "Thought you might sleep longer after last night." "I'm used to early mornings," Emma replied, cradling the coffee cup between her palms. "Farm life doesn't allow for sleeping in." Sully nodded, understanding in his eyes. "There's eggs if you're hungry," he said, gesturing toward a small basket on the table that Emma hadn't noticed. "Chickens are out back. Help yourself." "Thank you," Emma said, moving to examine the basket. Half a dozen brown eggs nestled inside. "I'll cook for both of us if that's all right." Sully looked like he might protest, then simply nodded and moved to wash his hands in the basin. Emma set about preparing breakfast, finding a skillet and a small crock of butter. The simple task of cooking helped steady her nerves, giving her hands something to do while her mind worked through the realities of her situation. "Your dress looks better," Sully commented as he took a seat at the table. Emma glanced down at the garment. "Yes, thank you for cleaning it." "It was kind of you." A slight flush colored Sully's cheeks. "Least I could do," he mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot to refill his cup. They ate in companionable silence, the eggs accompanied by the last of the previous night's bread. When they had finished, Emma gathered the dishes and began to wash them, ignoring Sully's half-hearted protest. "If I'm to stay a few days, I intend to earn my keep," she insisted. Sully watched her for a moment, then rose from the table. "I need to check on the horses," he said. "Then I thought we might ride to what's left of your place, see if anything can be salvaged." Emma's hands stilled in the soapy water. The thought of returning to the ashes of her home filled her with dread, but she knew it was necessary. "Yes," she agreed quietly, "I'd like that." Sully nodded and headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "Take your time," he said, his voice gentler than before. "I'll be out in the barn when you're ready." After he left, Emma finished the dishes and took a moment to collect herself. She had been running on instinct since the attack, with no time to truly process what had happened. Now, in the quiet of the morning, the full weight of her loss threatened to crush her. Her home, her possessions, her independence all gone in a single night of violence. But she was alive, she reminded herself. And she wasn't alone, at least for now. With a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and headed outside to find Sully. The morning air was crisp but not unpleasant, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of a fair day. Emma took a moment to survey her surroundings, seeing properly for the first time what had been only shadows the night before. Sully's cabin stood in a small clearing, backed by a stand of tall pines, and fronted by a modest corral where 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding, and a sleek black mare grazed on hay. A well-built barn stood to one side, and behind the cabin, Emma could see a vegetable garden, now mostly harvested for the coming winter, and a small chicken coop. It was a simple but well-maintained homestead, everything arranged with an eye toward functionality rather than comfort. Yet there was a certain beauty to it as well, the way the morning light played across the weathered wood of the buildings, the vibrant contrast of the remaining garden greens against the russet earth, the peaceful rhythm of the horses as they moved about the corral. Emma found Sully in the barn, saddling the bay gelding. The black mare was already tacked up, waiting patiently by the door. "You ride?" Sully asked without looking up from his task. "Yes," Emma confirmed. "My father taught me when I was young." Sully nodded, tightening the cinch with practiced movements. "The mare's gentle enough. Name's Midnight." A faint smile touched his lips. "Not very original, I know. And yours?" Emma asked, moving to stroke the gelding's nose. "Thunder," Sully replied. "He's sturdy and reliable, if not particularly fast." Emma smiled at that. "Sometimes steady is better than swift." Sully glanced at her, something approving in his gaze. "True enough," he agreed. Leading Thunder out of the barn, they mounted up, and Sully turned to Emma with a questioning look. "You remember the way?" Emma nodded, her throat tightening at the thought of what awaited them. "East, following the creek for about 5 miles, then north across the ridge." "Lead on, then," Sully said, gesturing for her to take the front. The ride was mostly silent, each lost in their own thoughts as they traversed the rugged landscape. Emma found herself studying Sully whenever she glanced back to ensure he was still following. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly, the way the sun brought out reddish highlights in his dark hair, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the prairie sun, the set of his shoulders that suggested both strength and a wariness born of experience. He caught her looking once and raised an eyebrow in silent question. Emma quickly turned forward again, a flush warming her cheeks. As they crested the final ridge, Emma's heart sank. Below them lay the blackened ruins of what had once been her home. The main house was a charred skeleton, its roof collapsed and walls partially standing like accusatory fingers pointed at the sky. The barn was even worse, almost completely reduced to ash, with only the stone foundation remaining to mark where it had stood. "Oh," she breathed, the single syllable carrying the weight of her devastation. Sully moved his horse alongside hers, his presence steady and grounding. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After a moment to compose herself, she urged Midnight forward, down the slope toward the ruins. They dismounted at what had once been the front yard, tethering the horses to the remains of the garden fence. Emma approached the house with slow steps, Sully following a respectful distance behind. The destruction was even more complete up close. Emma moved carefully through what had been her home for the past 5 years, searching for anything that might have survived the flames. Most of her possessions were gone, reduced to ash or warped beyond recognition by the heat. In what had been her parents' bedroom, Emma knelt and sifted through the debris, hoping against hope that something might have survived. Her fingers brushed against metal, and she carefully extracted a small, blackened object from the ashes. "My mother's locket," she whispered, cradling the tarnished piece of jewelry in her palm. The gold was discolored and the chain melted in places, but it was intact. Emma carefully opened it to reveal the tiny daguerreotype portraits inside her parents on their wedding day, their young faces smiling up at her through the years. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the locket to her chest. "At least I have this," she murmured. Sully's hand came to rest lightly on her shoulder, a silent offer of comfort that Emma accepted gratefully. After a moment, she tucked the locket into her pocket and rose to her feet. "There's nothing else," she said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's all gone." Sully's expression was grim as he surveyed the devastation around them. "Hargrove was thorough," he observed, a note of controlled anger in his voice. "Yes," Emma agreed bitterly. "He always is, from what I've heard." They continued to search through the ruins, finding little of value: a cast iron skillet that had survived the flames, a few metal utensils, and a half-melted tin box containing some of Emma's father's papers, most too damaged by fire and water to be legible. As they worked, Emma told Sully more about her parents, how they had come west when she was 17, drawn by the promise of land and a fresh start after her father's business had failed in Pennsylvania. How they had worked tirelessly to build this homestead, turning the wild prairie into productive farmland. How her mother had planted the rose bushes by the front door, determined to bring beauty to their frontier life. They were good people, she concluded, looking around at the destruction with renewed grief. They didn't deserve to die of fever in this harsh place, and they certainly didn't deserve to have their legacy destroyed by a man like Hargrove. "Few get what they deserve in this life," Sully replied quietly. "Good or bad." There was a weight to his words that suggested personal experience, but before Emma could respond, Sully stiffened, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Riders coming," he said, nodding toward the road that led to the homestead. Emma turned to see a cloud of dust approaching, resolving into 3 horsemen as they drew nearer. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the lead rider, Thaddeus Hargrove himself, flanked by 2 of his men. "Well, well," Hargrove called as they approached, his voice carrying across the yard. "Miss Anderson, I'm surprised to find you here. I thought perhaps you'd taken the hint and left the territory." He was a corpulent man in his 50s, expensively dressed despite the frontier setting, with a thick mustache waxed to sharp points and small, calculating eyes. The men with him were rough-looking cowboys, hands resting casually on their holstered weapons. "This is still my land, Mr. Hargrove," Emma replied, lifting her chin defiantly despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Legal deed or not, you had no right to destroy my home." Hargrove's gaze shifted to Sully, who had moved to stand slightly in front of Emma, his posture relaxed but alert. "And who might you be, friend?" "No friend of yours," Sully answered evenly. A tight smile stretched across Hargrove's face. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Yates Sullivan," Sully replied, making no move to step forward or offer his hand. Recognition flickered in Hargrove's eyes. "Sullivan. The recluse from over by Cottonwood Creek." His smile widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Interesting company you're keeping, Miss Anderson." "Mr. Sullivan has shown me more kindness than you ever have," Emma retorted. Hargrove chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Kindness, is it? Well, isn't that touching?" His expression hardened. "I don't know what you think you're doing here, Miss Anderson, but let me be clear. This land is mine now. The deed is registered with the territorial office. You're trespassing." "A deed obtained through fraud," Emma shot back. "My father never sold to you." "Your word against mine, my dear," Hargrove replied smoothly. "And I'm afraid the territorial judge is more inclined to believe a businessman of my standing than an orphaned girl with no proof to back her claims." Sully took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You've made your point, Hargrove. You've burned her home and stolen her land. There's nothing left for you here." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "I don't much care for your tone, Sullivan." "And I don't much care for men who burn women out of their homes," Sully countered. So I reckon we're even on that score. Tension crackled between them, the cowboys shifting in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. Emma placed a restraining hand on Sully's arm, feeling the coiled tension in his muscles. "We're leaving," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's nothing left for me here anyway." Hargrove smiled in satisfaction. "A wise decision, Miss Anderson. I would hate to see any further unpleasantness." Sully's jaw clenched, but he allowed Emma to guide him back toward their horses. As they mounted up, Hargrove called after them. "Oh, and Sullivan, I'd be careful about the company you keep. Miss Anderson seems to bring bad luck to those around her, first her parents and now her home. Who knows what might be next?" Sully's hand tightened on his reins, but Emma shook her head slightly. "He's not worth it," she murmured. "Please." After a tense moment, Sully nodded, and they rode away without looking back, the sound of Hargrove's mocking laughter following them down the road. They rode in silence until they were well away from the homestead, the tension gradually easing from Sully's shoulders as the distance between them and Hargrove increased. "I'm sorry," Emma said finally. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door." Sully glanced at her, his expression softening. "You didn't bring the trouble," he assured her. "Hargrove did." "Still," Emma persisted, "you've been nothing but kind, and now you've made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory." A grim smile touched Sully's lips. "Hargrove and I were never going to be friends, Emma. Don't trouble yourself on that account." They continued riding, but instead of returning directly to Sully's cabin, he led them on a detour through a stand of cottonwoods to a small, clear stream. "Thought we could rest the horses," he explained, dismounting and leading Thunder to the water's edge. Emma followed suit, grateful for the chance to stretch her legs and wash the ash and soot from her hands in the cold, clear water. The peaceful gurgle of the stream and the gentle rustling of the cottonwood leaves overhead helped soothe her frayed nerves. "What will you do now?" Sully asked, settling beside her on a fallen log. Emma sighed, staring at the water as it flowed over smooth stones. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I had was in that house." "You mentioned Pine Creek," Sully suggested. "There's a small hotel there. They might need help." Emma nodded, though the prospect held little appeal. Working as a hotel maid or laundress would be a far cry from the independence she had known on her own homestead. "Or," Sully continued, his voice carefully neutral, "you could stay with me." Emma turned to him in surprise. "Stay?" Sully kept his gaze on the stream, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "Just until you get back on your feet," he clarified quickly. "Winter's coming. Not a good time to be starting over with nothing." "But you hardly know me," Emma pointed out. "I know enough," Sully replied, finally meeting her eyes. "I know you're a hard worker. I know you stood up to Hargrove when most would have backed down. I know you've got grit." There was admiration in his voice that made Emma's heart beat a little faster. "And you wouldn't mind the imposition?" she asked softly. A small smile tugged at the corner of Sully's mouth. "Like I said, place could use a woman's touch." He hesitated, then added, "And I wouldn't mind the company. Gets quiet out there alone." Emma considered his offer. Staying with a man she barely knew went against every convention of propriety she'd been raised with. Yet something about Sully inspired trust, and the alternative, trying to make her way alone in Pine Creek with winter approaching, was daunting. "People will talk," she warned him. Sully shrugged. "Not many people to talk out here," he pointed out. "And those that do, well, their opinion doesn't matter much to me." Emma smiled at that. "No, I don't imagine it would." "So," Sully prompted after a moment, "what do you say?" Emma took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood at a crossroads. Behind her lay the ashes of her old life, ahead an uncertain future. But Sully's steady presence beside her offered a third path, one that felt, instinctively, like the right choice. "I say yes," she decided. "Until I get back on my feet." Sully nodded, something like relief flickering across his features before his usual reserve returned. "Good," he said simply, rising to his feet. "We should head back before dark." As they mounted up and turned toward Sully's cabin, Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her: grief for all she had lost, anxiety about the future, but also, unexpectedly, a small spark of hope. Whatever lay ahead, she wouldn't face it alone. The next few weeks established a rhythm to their shared life that felt surprisingly natural. Emma threw herself into the work of the homestead, grateful for the distraction it provided from her grief and uncertainty. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, mended Sully's clothes, took over the cooking, and helped with the daily chores of caring for the animals and preparing for the approaching winter. Sully, for his part, seemed both pleased by her presence and unsure how to adapt to sharing his space after years of solitude. He was unfailingly polite, always careful to maintain a respectful distance. But Emma sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between wonder and wariness, as if he both welcomed her presence and feared it. They settled into a comfortable routine of shared meals and divided labor. During the days, they often worked side by side, harvesting the last of the garden vegetables, smoking meat for the winter stores, repairing fences, and chopping firewood. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Emma mending or knitting while Sully whittled or cleaned his gear, their conversation gradually becoming easier as they grew more accustomed to each other's company. Emma learned that Sully had indeed fought in the war between the states, serving with the Union Army despite his Virginia roots, a choice that had estranged him from his family. He had returned home after the war to find his parents dead from typhoid and the family farm in ruins. With nothing left to keep him there, he had headed west, working as a ranch hand before staking his claim on the land by Cottonwood Creek. "Never meant to stay here permanent," he admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, a rare snow falling outside the cabin windows. "Thought I'd work the land for a few years, then sell it and move on." "What changed?" Emma asked, looking up from the shirt she was mending. Sully was silent for a long moment, his hand stilling on the piece of wood he was carving. "Started to feel like home," he said finally. "First time since before the war that I didn't feel the need to keep moving." Emma nodded, understanding the sentiment. "That's how it was for my parents with our homestead," she said softly. "My mother especially. She'd never been happier than she was working that land." "You miss it," Sully observed, his eyes on her face. "Every day," Emma admitted. "Not just the place, but the feeling of it being mine, of having something that belonged to me that I was responsible for." Sully nodded, returning to his carving. "Understand that," he said quietly. As the days shortened and the weather grew colder, their world narrowed to the snug confines of the cabin and the immediate surroundings. They ventured into Pine Creek only once, to sell some of Sully's pelts and purchase supplies they couldn't produce themselves: coffee, sugar, flour, and fabric for Emma to sew herself some new clothes. The small settlement was a collection of rough buildings clustered around a single muddy street: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and a handful of houses. Emma felt the curious stares of the townspeople as she and Sully made their purchases, heard the whispers that followed them from the general store to the hotel where they stopped for a hot meal. "Don't mind them," Sully murmured as they ate their stew at a corner table. "They're just curious about the new face, and wondering about the nature of our arrangement, no doubt," Emma added with a wry smile. Sully's expression darkened. "Anyone says anything untoward, they won't," Emma assured him, touched by his protectiveness. "At least not to our faces." The hotel owner's wife, a friendly woman named Mrs. Delaney, approached their table as they were finishing their meal. "Mr. Sullivan," she greeted with a nod. "Don't see you in town often." "Mrs. Delaney," Sully returned politely. "Just needed some supplies." Mrs. Delaney turned her attention to Emma, curiosity bright in her eyes. "And who might this be?" "Emma Anderson." Emma introduced herself, extending her hand. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Delaney." "Miss Anderson lost her homestead in a fire," Sully explained before Mrs. Delaney could ask the question Emma could see forming. "She's staying with me until she gets back on her feet." Mrs. Delaney's eyebrows rose slightly, but to her credit, she maintained her friendly demeanor. "I'm sorry to hear of your troubles, Miss Anderson. If you're looking for work, we could always use help here at the hotel." "Thank you for the offer," Emma replied sincerely. "I'll certainly keep it in mind." As they rode back to the cabin that afternoon, Emma found herself reflecting on Mrs. Delaney's offer. It was a kind gesture, and the practical part of her knew she should probably accept it. Working at the hotel would give her a wage and a place to stay that wouldn't raise eyebrows the way her current arrangement did. Yet the thought of leaving Sully's cabin filled her with a peculiar sadness. In the short time she had been there, it had begun to feel like home in a way she hadn't expected. And Sully himself, well, his presence in her life had become something she looked forward to each day, from their shared breakfast to their quiet evenings by the fire. "You're thinking about Mrs. Delaney's offer," Sully observed, breaking into her thoughts. Emma glanced at him, surprised by his perception. "How did you know?" A small smile touched his lips. "You get a little crease right here when you're wrestling with something," he said, gesturing to the space between his own eyebrows. "Oh," Emma replied, oddly touched that he had noticed such a detail. "Yes, I was thinking about it." "It's a good offer," Sully said, his tone carefully neutral. "Respectable work, your own wages." "Yes," Emma agreed. "It is." They rode in silence for a few moments before Sully spoke again. "You don't have to decide right away," he said. "Like I told you before, you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Emma studied his profile, trying to discern his true feelings behind the neutral expression. "And if I decided to stay through the winter?" she asked cautiously. Sully's gaze remained fixed on the trail ahead, but Emma thought she detected a slight relaxing of his shoulders. "Cabin's snug enough for two," he said simply. The subject wasn't raised again that day, but that evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Emma made her decision. "I think I'll stay," she said, looking up from her sewing to find Sully's eyes already on her. "At least until spring, if that's truly all right with you." A smile spread slowly across Sully's face, transforming his usually serious features. "More than all right," he said quietly. Something warm unfurled in Emma's chest at his expression, a feeling she wasn't quite ready to name but couldn't deny existed. She returned to her sewing, aware of Sully's gaze lingering on her face a moment longer before he resumed his own task. Outside, the first heavy snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in white and sealing them in their shared solitude. Winter settled over the prairie with a fierce determination, bringing howling blizzards that kept them confined to the cabin for days at a time. Emma had experienced Wyoming winters before, but never in such close quarters with another person. She and Sully developed a delicate dance of shared space, each respecting the other's need for privacy as best they could within the confines of the single-room cabin. At night, Emma still took the bed while Sully slept on his bedroll near the fire, though she had offered more than once to alternate. Wouldn't be proper. He had insisted the first time she suggested it. "I think we're well past worrying about what's proper," Emma had countered with a small smile. "I'm living unchaperoned in a cabin with a man I'm not married to. Sleeping arrangements are the least of my concerns at this point." That had startled a laugh from Sully, a rare sound that Emma found herself wanting to hear more often. "Even so," he had said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "my ma raised me better than to take a lady's bed while she sleeps on the floor." Emma had conceded the point, secretly relieved. For all that their living arrangement flouted convention, maintaining some boundaries helped her feel that she wasn't completely abandoning the propriety she had been raised to value. As December deepened toward Christmas, Emma found herself thinking of ways to make the holiday special despite their isolation. She set aside a portion of the flour and sugar they had purchased in town, planning to bake something festive. She also worked in secret during the hours when Sully was out checking his trap lines, using scraps of leather to craft a new belt pouch for him to replace his worn one. 3 days before Christmas, a brief break in the weather allowed Sully to venture out to check his traps. He returned mid-afternoon with a small pine tree strapped to Thunder's back. "What's this?" Emma asked, stepping out onto the porch as he dismounted. "Christmas tree," Sully replied, a touch of self-consciousness in his voice. "Thought you might like one." "My mother always insisted on having a tree, even during the leanest years." Emma's heart swelled with unexpected emotion. "It's perfect," she said softly. Together they set up the tree in the corner of the cabin, using an old bucket filled with rocks to keep it upright. Emma unboxed the few ornaments she had salvaged from her homestead's simple wooden figures her father had carved over the years, now smoke-stained but intact. "These are beautiful," Sully commented, carefully examining a small wooden star. "Your father was talented." "He was," Emma agreed, a familiar ache of loss tempering her joy. "He made one new piece each Christmas. Said it was his gift to my mother and me." Sully nodded, handing the star back to her with a gentleness that suggested he understood its value went far beyond the simple wood it was made from. "Where should it go?" he asked. Emma placed the star at the top of the tree, stepping back to admire the effect. It was a humble decoration by any standard, a small pine, with a handful of wooden ornaments and no candles or tinsel, but to Emma, it represented something profound, the creation of new traditions in the aftermath of loss. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off the snow-covered landscape outside the cabin windows. Emma woke early, eager to prepare the special breakfast. She had planned biscuits with honey and dried apples stewed with cinnamon, a luxury she had been saving for the occasion. Sully emerged from his bedroll as the scent of baking filled the cabin, his hair tousled from sleep in a way that made him look younger, less guarded. "Merry Christmas," he greeted, his voice still rough with sleep. "Merry Christmas," Emma returned, smiling as she pulled the biscuits from the oven. "I hope you're hungry." They ate breakfast at the small table, which Emma had covered with her best handkerchief in lieu of a proper tablecloth. The simple meal felt festive in the context of their usual fare, and they lingered over it, sharing stories of Christmases past. Afterward, Emma presented Sully with the belt pouch she had made, wrapped in a piece of brown paper and tied with a bit of twine. "It's not much," she said, suddenly shy, "but I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me." Sully unwrapped the gift with careful movements, his expression softening as he examined the pouch. Emma had tooled a simple design into the leather, a stylized cottonwood tree representing his homestead. "You made this?" he asked, running his thumb over the design. Emma nodded. "My father taught me leatherwork when I was young. I'm not as skilled as he was, but it's perfect," Sully interrupted, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thank you, Emma." He reached beneath his bed and produced a small package, similarly wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you too," he said, offering it to her. Emma accepted the package with surprise. She hadn't expected a gift in return. Unwrapping it carefully, she gasped when she saw what lay inside: a delicate wooden carving of a rose in full bloom. So detailed she could make out individual petals and the subtle texture of the leaves. "You mentioned your mother's roses," Sully explained, watching her reaction closely. "Thought you might like a reminder, one that won't fade with the seasons." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she cradled the carving in her palm. "It's beautiful," she whispered, too moved to say more. Sully reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing a tear from her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Didn't mean to make you cry," he said softly. Emma leaned into his touch, unable to help herself. "Happy tears," she assured him, offering a watery smile. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Their gazes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, stronger and deeper than either had anticipated, when Emma first arrived at his door that stormy night. Sully's hand lingered on her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw with a tenderness that made her heart race. For a breathless moment, Emma thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her, she realized with sudden clarity. Instead, he drew back, clearing his throat and rising from the table. "Weather's clear," he observed, moving to the window. "Thought we might ride out after breakfast if you'd like. There's a view from the ridge to the north that's something to see after a fresh snow." Emma felt a flicker of disappointment, quickly replaced by understanding. Sully was being careful, maintaining the boundaries that propriety demanded, even as their feelings for each other evolved into something neither had expected. "I'd like that," she said, setting the wooden rose carefully on the table. "Give me a few minutes to get ready." The ride was everything Sully had promised, the landscape transformed into a glittering wonderland, the sky an impossible blue above the pristine white of the snow-covered prairie. They rode to the ridge he had mentioned, where the view extended for miles in every direction, the distant mountains rising sharp and clear against the horizon. "It's breathtaking," Emma said, drawing Midnight to a halt beside Thunder. Sully nodded, his eyes on the vista before them. "First winter I was here, I rode up to this spot after a blizzard. Never seen anything like it, the whole world clean and new, like it had been made fresh just for me to see." He glanced at her, a smile touching his lips. "Figured it was worth sharing." "Thank you for bringing me," Emma said, touched by his desire to share something that clearly meant a great deal to him. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the occasional stamp of the horses' hooves and the whisper of the wind through the pines. It was Sully who eventually broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. "Been thinking," he said, his gaze still on the distant horizon, "about spring and what comes after." Emma turned to him, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Oh." Sully nodded, a slight furrow between his brows as he chose his words. "You said you wanted something of your own again, land that belongs to you." "Yes," Emma confirmed, unsure where he was leading. "My claim is larger than I need," Sully continued, finally meeting her eyes. "Northwest corner where the creek bends its good land. Could build a cabin there, put in a garden. You could have your own place but not be too far away." Emma stared at him, processing his offer. It was generous beyond measure, a gift of land and independence, the two things she had lost when Hargrove destroyed her homestead. "You would do that?" she asked softly. "Give me part of your land," Sully nodded, his expression earnest. "You've made a home here, Emma." "In my cabin, yes, but more than that, on this land. I've seen how you care for it, how you belong to it as much as it belongs to you." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like you to stay, not just through winter, but for good." The implication of his words hung between them, not quite a proposal, but more than a mere offer of land. It was an invitation to build a future together, in whatever form that might take. "I'd like that too," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "To stay, I mean." Relief and something like joy spread across Sully's features, softening the lines around his eyes. "Good," he said simply, though the word carried the weight of promise. As they turned their horses toward the cabin that had become home to them, both Emma felt a sense of rightness settle over her, as clear and crisp as the winter air around them. What had begun as a desperate flight from danger had led her to something unexpected. A new beginning, a new home, and perhaps a new love. The winter months passed in a blur of shared work and growing closeness. As January gave way to February, Emma and Sully fell into an easy partnership, their initial awkwardness around each other fading as they learned each other's habits and preferences. They worked side by side during the day, tending to the livestock, mending equipment, and preparing for the eventual spring thaw. In the evenings, they shared the fruits of their labor-hearty stews and fresh bread, stories and quiet companionship by the fire. It was during these evening hours that their relationship deepened most noticeably. Sully, who had been so reserved when Emma first arrived, gradually opened up about his childhood in Virginia, his experiences during the war, and the lonely years that followed as he made his way west. Emma, in turn, shared her own history, her sheltered upbringing in Pennsylvania, her initial reluctance to move west with her parents, and her eventual love for the freedom and beauty of the frontier. "I never thought I'd stay out here after they died," she admitted one evening as they sat before the fire, a late February snowstorm howling outside. "I thought I'd sell the homestead and go back east, but when the time came to decide, I couldn't bear to leave. This land had become part of me somehow." Sully nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It gets into your blood," he agreed. "The open spaces, the sky that goes on forever, makes everywhere else feel too confined." "Exactly," Emma said, pleased that he understood. "My aunt wrote after my parents died, offering me a place in Boston. A comfortable life," she said, "but the thought of going back to the city, to all those people and buildings pressing in." She shook her head. "I couldn't do it." "And now," Sully asked, his gaze steady on her face, "after everything that's happened with Hargrove and your homestead, do you ever think about taking your aunt up on her offer?" Emma considered the question seriously, though in her heart she already knew the answer. "No," she said finally. "Even with everything I've lost, I belong here now." She met his eyes, adding softly, "More than ever." Something flickered in Sully's expression, a warmth that made Emma's heart beat faster. He reached across the space between their chairs, his fingers brushing against hers in a touch that was becoming increasingly common between them. "I'm glad," he said simply. As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, Sully took Emma to the northwest corner of his property, where he had proposed she might build her own cabin. The snow was still deep in places, but patches of ground were beginning to show through, hinting at the spring to come. "Creek doesn't freeze here, even in the coldest weather," Sully explained as they stood surveying the site. "Something about the way it flows. Good for watering livestock year-round." Emma nodded, taking in the lay of the land. It was beautiful, a gentle slope leading down to the creek, sheltered by a stand of pines on the north side that would block the worst of the winter winds. The soil, where visible, looked rich and dark. "It's perfect," she said, turning to Sully with a smile. "Truly perfect." Sully's expression softened, pleasure evident in his eyes. "Thought you'd like it," he said. "We can start clearing for the cabin as soon as the ground thaws properly. Have you moved in by summer if all goes well?" Emma's smile faltered slightly at his words. She had been thinking, hoping, if she was honest with herself, that their living arrangement might evolve into something more permanent. That perhaps, by spring, Sully might suggest a different solution to their situation. Sully caught the change in her expression. "What is it?" he asked, concern creasing his brow. Emma hesitated, unsure how to express her feelings without overstepping. "It's a wonderful gift," she assured him. "More generous than I can say. She paused, gathering her courage. "I've grown accustomed to our life together, in your cabin. I'm not sure I'm ready to live alone again." Understanding dawned in Sully's eyes, followed by something that looked very much like hope. "Emma," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I didn't want to presume. You came to me in need of shelter, not anything else." "And now?" Emma prompted gently when he fell silent. Sully took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "Now I can't imagine this place without you in it," he admitted quietly. "Not just the land, but my home, my life." Emma's heart soared at his words. "I feel the same," she whispered. Sully's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm not good with words," he said, his gaze intense. "Never have been. But I need you to know that I care for you, Emma, more than I thought possible to care for anyone again." "I care for you too," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "So much." For a moment, they stood there, the confession hanging between them like a tangible thing. Then, with a slowness that spoke of reverence rather than hesitation, Sully lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative at first, as if he feared she might pull away. But when Emma leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, Sully deepened the kiss, one arm sliding around her waist to draw her closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Sully rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that for a while now," he admitted, a smile in his voice. "What took you so long?" Emma teased gently. Sully chuckled, the sound warming her from within. "Wasn't sure if you felt the same," he said. "And I didn't want to make you uncomfortable, given our situation." "Well, now you know," Emma replied, reaching up to touch his face, the roughness of his stubble against her palm a pleasant contrast to the softness of his gaze. They stood there for a long moment, simply enjoying the newfound openness between them. Finally, Sully gestured toward the land around them. "So, about this cabin," he began. "Yes," Emma prompted, curious about where his thoughts were leading. "Was thinking it might make a good addition to the homestead," he said carefully. "But not necessarily as your separate home." Emma raised an eyebrow, encouraging him to continue. "Could be a workshop, maybe," Sully suggested, "or a place for storage. Or—" He hesitated, then added with a hint of shyness that was endearing on such a self-possessed man, "might be good to have extra space if a family were to grow." The implication of his words sent a flush of warmth through Emma. "Are you asking me something, Yates Sullivan?" she asked, using his full name deliberately. Sully took a deep breath, reaching for her hands. "I'm asking if you might consider making our current arrangement permanent," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Not out of necessity or convenience, but because I love you, Emma, and I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll have you." Sully's face broke into a smile more radiant than any she had seen from him before. He pulled her close, kissing her again with a passion that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. As they walked back toward the cabin hand in hand, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky, Emma reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. From the tragedy of losing her parents, to the terror of being driven from her home, to finding refuge and eventually love in Sully's cabin, it was a path she could never have imagined for herself. Yet standing here now, with Sully's hand warm and solid in hers, she couldn't wish for any other outcome. What had begun as a desperate flight into the night had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. The coming of spring brought a flurry of activity to the homestead. As the snow melted and the ground thawed, Sully and Emma began the work of preparing for their future together. They decided to expand the existing cabin rather than build a separate structure, adding a second room that would give them more space while maintaining the coziness of the home they had come to love. Sully proved to be as skilled at carpentry as he was at trapping and hunting. Under his direction, the new addition took shape quickly, Emma working alongside him whenever possible, learning to saw boards and drive nails with increasing confidence. "You're a natural," Sully observed one afternoon as Emma successfully fitted a window frame into place. "Might have to reconsider my occupation if you keep improving at this rate." Emma laughed, brushing sawdust from her skirt. "I like working with my hands," she admitted. "It feels good to be building something instead of just maintaining what's already there." Sully nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Creation instead of preservation," he said thoughtfully. "Though there's value in both." "There is," Emma agreed, looking around at the cabin that had sheltered them through the winter, the home they were now expanding together. "I'm grateful for what you preserved here, Sully. It gave me a foundation to build on when I had nothing." Sully's expression softened, and he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering on her cheek. "You gave as much as you got," he said quietly. "Maybe more." In late April, with the addition nearly complete, they rode into Pine Creek to speak with the circuit preacher who visited the settlement once a month. The Reverend, a kindly older man named Simmons, agreed to perform their wedding ceremony the following Sunday. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Mrs. Delaney insisted on hosting a modest celebration at the hotel after the ceremony, an offer Emma accepted with gratitude. "It's about time Sully found himself a wife, Mrs. Delaney declared as she showed Emma the hotel's small dining room where the gathering would be held. "That man's been alone too long. It's not good for the soul." Emma smiled, thinking of the transformation she had witnessed in Sully over the months they had spent together, how his initial reserve had gradually given way to warmth and openness, at least with her. "I think we found each other at exactly the right time," she said, "when we both needed someone." Mrs. Delaney patted her hand approvingly. "That's how the good Lord works, dear. Brings people together when they need each other most." Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, the prairie dressed in its spring finery, wildflowers dotting the landscape, with splashes of color against the new green grass. Emma wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton that she had sewn herself, adorned with a bit of lace she had salvaged from her mother's wedding dress before the fire. Her hair was arranged in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, decorated with a sprig of wild roses that Sully had found growing near the creek. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt, held in the small room above the general store that served as Pine Creek's church when the circuit preacher was in town. The few attendees, mainly shopkeepers and ranchers from the surrounding area, who knew Sully by reputation, if not through close acquaintance, watched with evident approval as the couple exchanged their vows. "Do you, Yates Sullivan, take Emma Anderson to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Simmons intoned, his voice carrying easily in the small space. "I do," Sully replied, his gaze never leaving Emma's face, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Emma Anderson, take Yates Sullivan to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Emma answered, her heart so full she thought it might burst from her chest. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "Mr. Sullivan, you may kiss your bride." Sully's kiss was gentle, but carried a promise that made Emma's cheeks flush and her pulse quicken. When they turned to face their small audience, the applause and well wishes warmed her heart, making her feel truly part of this community for the first time. The celebration at the hotel was simple but joyful, a meal of roast beef and fresh spring vegetables, followed by a cake Mrs. Delaney had baked for the occasion. There was music, too, provided by the local blacksmith who played a fiddle with surprising skill, and even some dancing in the cleared space at the center of the room. "Never thought I'd see the day Sully would take a wife," Emma overheard one of the ranchers comment to his companion. "Man's been a lone wolf since he came to these parts. Takes the right woman to change a man's mind," the other replied with a knowing nod in Emma's direction. "And by the looks of it, he found her." The validation of their union by the community, however small, meant more to Emma than she had expected. After months of living outside the bounds of conventional propriety, it was a relief to have their relationship recognized and celebrated. As the afternoon waned, Sully found her by the window, watching the dancers with a contented smile. "Ready to head home, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, the new name rolling off his tongue with evident pleasure. Emma's heart skipped at the address. "Mrs. Sullivan," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "I like the way that sounds." "So do I," Sully admitted, offering his arm. "More than I can say." They said their goodbyes and thank yous to the well-wishers, accepting congratulations and good-natured teasing with equal grace. The ride back to their cabin was filled with a charged anticipation, their conversation interspersed with long, comfortable silences and meaningful glances. As they approached the homestead, the setting sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, turning the modest cabin into something almost ethereal. Sully drew Thunder to a halt at the top of the rise, Midnight stopping beside him. "What is it?" Emma asked, following his gaze to their home below. "Just looking," Sully replied, a note of wonder in his voice. "Never thought I'd have this, Emma. A home that's more than just a place to sleep, a wife to share it with." Emma reached across the space between them, taking his hand. "I never thought I'd have it again after the fire," she admitted. "You gave me back more than just shelter, Sully. You gave me hope." Sully's fingers tightened around hers, his eyes reflecting the sunset as he turned to look at her. "And you gave me a future I could look forward to," he said softly. "One I wasn't even sure I wanted until you came along." They continued down the slope, the horses picking their way carefully in the fading light. When they reached the cabin, Sully dismounted first, then turned to help Emma down. But instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her into his arms, eliciting a surprised laugh from his new wife. "What are you doing?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Carrying my bride across the threshold," Sully replied with a smile that transformed his usually serious features. "It's tradition, isn't it?" "So I've heard," Emma agreed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her to the cabin door. Inside, they found that someone Mrs. Delaney, Emma suspected, had been there during the ceremony. The cabin was spotless, with fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table and the bed made up with what appeared to be new linens. "Well, that was thoughtful," Emma observed as Sully set her gently on her feet. "Very," Sully agreed, a hint of color rising in his cheeks as his gaze lingered on the bed. There was a moment of shy awkwardness between them, a reminder that for all they had shared a cabin for months, this aspect of marriage was new territory for them both. Then Emma reached up to touch his face, drawing his gaze back to hers. "I love you, Yates Sullivan," she said softly. "And I am very glad to be your wife." The tension melted from Sully's shoulders, replaced by a tenderness that took Emma's breath away. "And I love you, Emma Sullivan," he replied, his hands coming to rest at her waist. "More than I have words to say." Words, as it turned out, were unnecessary as Sully lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, of the love that had grown between them against all odds, of the home they would continue to build side by side. Outside, the first stars of evening appeared in the darkening sky, witnesses to the beginning of a new chapter in a story that had started on a night much like this one, when a woman, driven from her home, had found her way to a cabin where a cowboy lit his lamp and led her to safety. But safety, Emma now knew, was just the beginning of what she had found that night. She had found her future, her heart's home, her love. And as Sully's arms tightened around her, drawing her closer into his embrace, she knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they had faced the long winter and the promise of spring. In the year that followed their wedding, Emma and Sully built a life together that exceeded both their expectations. The expanded cabin became a true home, filled with the small touches that reflected their shared tastes and individual contributions. Emma's skilled needlework adorned the windows and bed, while Sully's wood carvings added beauty to the practical furnishings. They planted a larger garden than Sully had maintained on his own, adding fruit trees and berry bushes that would take years to fully mature, a testament to their commitment to a shared future on this land. News of Hargrove's activities continued to reach them through occasional visits to Pine Creek. The land baron's influence in the territory was growing, with more small homesteaders finding themselves pressured to sell or face consequences similar to what Emma had experienced. "He can't keep getting away with it," Emma said one evening as they returned from town, where they had heard about another family forced from their claim under suspicious circumstances. "Someone needs to stand up to him." Sully's expression was grim as he stabled the horses. "It would take more than one person," he observed. "Hargrove has too many men on his payroll, including the law." "Then perhaps it takes many people standing together," Emma suggested, her mind working through the possibilities. "If all the small landholders united, presented a common front." Sully considered this, nodding slowly. "Might work," he acknowledged, "but it would be risky. Hargrove doesn't take kindly to opposition." "Neither do I," Emma replied with a determined lift of her chin. "Not anymore." Over the following weeks, Emma and Sully began reaching out to neighboring homesteaders and small ranchers, inviting them to gather at their cabin to discuss the Hargrove situation. The response was cautious at first. Many feared retribution, but gradually, a small coalition formed. Their first meeting was held on a mild summer evening, with a dozen men and women gathered in the Sullivans' yard. Emma served coffee and her freshly baked bread as they shared stories of Hargrove's tactics, forged deeds, midnight intimidation, mysterious fires, cattle suddenly scattered or missing. "He's counting on us being isolated," Emma pointed out as the discussion progressed. "On each of us feeling alone and vulnerable, but together we have strength he can't easily overcome." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked William Jensen, a Danish immigrant who farmed a small plot 5 miles to the east. "That we form an association," Emma explained, the idea having taken shape in her mind over the preceding days. "Pool our resources to hire a lawyer from Cheyenne, someone not in Hargrove's pocket. Document every incident, every threat. Build a case to take to the territorial governor if necessary." The suggestion was met with murmurs of consideration, some skeptical, others hopeful. Sully, who had been mostly quiet during the gathering, spoke up in support. "Emma's right," he said, his voice carrying weight with the assembled neighbors. Alone, we're easy targets. Together, we stand a chance. By the end of the evening, the Wyoming Homesteaders Association had been formed, with Emma elected as secretary and Sully as one of 5 committee members tasked with gathering evidence of Hargrove's wrongdoing. The work was slow and often discouraging. Hargrove, upon hearing of the association's formation, increased his pressure on the most vulnerable members, forcing some to abandon their claims and flee the territory. But for each family that left, others joined the cause, drawn by the promise of collective strength and the fierce determination of the woman who had once lost everything to Hargrove's greed. Throughout this period of community activism, Emma and Sully's personal life continued to flourish. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of shared hardship and mutual respect, deepened with each passing season. They worked their land side by side, made decisions together, and at night shared the intimate connection that had transformed their relationship from one of necessity to one of passionate commitment. It was during the winter of 1876, as they approached their first wedding anniversary, that Emma realized she was with child. She kept the knowledge to herself for several weeks, wanting to be certain before sharing the news with Sully. When she finally told him one evening as they sat before the fire, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hushed with wonder. "You're sure?" Emma nodded, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Doctor Simmons confirmed it when we were in town yesterday," she said, referring to the physician who had recently established a practice in Pine Creek. "He says all appears well, with the child due in early summer." Sully's face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to Emma's eyes. He knelt before her chair, placing his large, work-roughened hand over hers. "A family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our family." "Yes," Emma agreed, cupping his cheek with her free hand. "Our family." The months of Emma's pregnancy coincided with increasing tension between the Homesteaders Association and Hargrove's interests. The lawyer they had hired from Cheyenne, a sharp-minded young man named James Parkman, had begun building a compelling case documenting Hargrove's illegal activities, including evidence of forged deeds and bribed officials. Hargrove, feeling the pressure, grew more aggressive. In April, Jensen's barn was burned to the ground, and the following week, another association member found 2 of his cows slaughtered in his pasture, a clear warning. "This has gone far enough," Sully declared after the latter incident, his concern for Emma's safety growing with each passing week of her pregnancy. "I want you to step back from the association until after the baby comes." Emma, now visibly pregnant but no less determined, shook her head. "I can't abandon what we've started," she insisted. "Not when we're finally making progress." "Emma," Sully said, his voice softening as he took her hands in his, "I'm not asking you to abandon anything, just to let others take the lead for a while, for our child's sake if not for your own." Seeing the genuine worry in his eyes, Emma relented partially. "I'll stop attending the meetings in person," she agreed, "but I'll continue keeping the records and corresponding with Mr. Parkman. That much I can do from home." Sully accepted this compromise, though he doubled his vigilance around their homestead, never going far from the cabin and keeping his rifle close at hand. His protective instincts, always strong, had intensified with Emma's pregnancy, a fact that both touched and occasionally frustrated his independent-minded wife. In early June, just as the wildflowers were reaching their peak across the prairie, Emma went into labor. The nearest midwife was 10 miles away, but Sully had anticipated this moment and had arranged for a neighbor to ride for her at the first sign of the baby's arrival. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day. Sully remained by Emma's side throughout, his calm presence an anchor amidst the waves of pain that threatened to overwhelm her. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her during a brief respite between contractions, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "You can do this, Emma. I know you can." Emma clung to his words and his hand as the labor intensified, drawing strength from the unwavering faith in his eyes. When their daughter finally entered the world just as the sun was setting on the second day, her lusty cry filled the cabin with a new kind of music. "She's perfect," the midwife declared, placing the swaddled infant in Emma's trembling arms. "A fine, healthy girl." Emma gazed down at the tiny face, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down her cheeks. The baby had a dusting of dark hair like Sully's and a determined set to her tiny mouth that already hinted at her mother's spirit. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tracing a finger along the baby's velvet soft cheek. "We've been waiting for you." Sully sat on the edge of the bed, his expression a mixture of awe and adoration as he looked at his wife and newborn daughter. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like her mother." Emma smiled up at him, feeling a completeness she had never known before, a circle of love encompassing the three of them, perfect in its simplicity and profound in its depth. "What shall we name her?" Sully asked, gently touching the baby's tiny hand, which immediately curled around his finger with surprising strength. Emma had been considering names for months, but in this moment, looking at their daughter and remembering all that had brought them to this point, one name felt right above all others. "Rose," she said softly, "for new beginnings that grow from what seemed lost." Sully's eyes met hers, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. "Rose Sullivan," he repeated, testing the sound of it. "It's perfect." The midwife discreetly busied herself with cleaning up, giving the new family a moment of privacy. When she had finished her tasks, she left with instructions for Emma's care and a promise to return in a few days to check on mother and child. That night, as darkness settled over the prairie and little Rose slept peacefully in the cradle Sully had crafted for her, Emma found herself overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of being driven from her home that stormy night, to the sanctuary of Sully's lamp guiding her to his cabin, to the love that had blossomed between them and now the miracle of their daughter, it was a path she could never have foreseen, but now wouldn't change for anything in the world. "What are you thinking about?" Sully asked softly, sitting beside her on the bed, his hand gently stroking her hair. Emma smiled up at him, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best," she replied. "If Hargrove hadn't burned my home, I would never have found you, never have found this." Sully nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," he agreed. "Some terrible, some wonderful. And some that start as one and become the other," Emma added, thinking of that frightening night that had ultimately led her to this moment of perfect contentment. Sully leaned down to kiss her gently, then rose to check on Rose, who was beginning to stir in her cradle. He lifted the infant with a tenderness that made Emma's heart swell, cradling her against his broad chest with natural ease. "I think someone's hungry," he said, bringing the baby to Emma. As Emma nursed their daughter, Sully sat beside them, his presence a shield of love and protection around his family. Outside, the Wyoming night unfolded in all its vast, star-strewn glory. But inside the cabin that had become a home, a smaller but no less magnificent universe existed, one created by two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of loss. The summer of 1877 brought both joy and challenge to the Sullivan homestead. Little Rose thrived, growing from a newborn into an alert, curious infant whose smile could light up the darkest day. Emma recovered well from the birth, though the demands of motherhood combined with maintaining the homestead, and her continued work with the Homesteaders Association often left her exhausted by day's end. Sully proved to be a devoted father, as gentle with Rose as he was capable in all other aspects of their life together. He would carry her with him as he did chores around the homestead, pointing out animals and plants, speaking to her in the same serious, thoughtful tone he used with adults. At night, he would rock her to sleep, singing old Virginia lullabies in a low, surprisingly melodious voice that never failed to soothe the baby and often Emma as well. "You're a natural with her," Emma observed one evening as Sully managed to quiet Rose's fussing with a patience that seemed inexhaustible. A shadow crossed Sully's face, a fleeting expression of old pain that Emma had come to recognize. "Had a sister," he said after a moment, his voice soft as he stroked Rose's dark hair. "Much younger than me, helped my mother care for her before the war." It was the first time he had mentioned a sister, and Emma waited, giving him space to continue if he wished. Sully had become more open about his past since their marriage, but there were still pieces of his history he rarely discussed. "Mary," he continued after a long pause. "She was 10 when I left for the war. Fever took her and my mother while I was gone." Emma reached out to touch his arm, understanding now another layer of the grief he carried. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Sully nodded, his gaze on Rose's peaceful face. "She would have been about your age now," he mused. "I think she would have liked you." "I'm sure I would have liked her too," Emma replied softly. These quiet moments of connection and revelation continued to deepen their relationship, even as external pressures mounted. The Homesteaders Association had made significant progress in their case against Hargrove, with lawyer Parkman preparing to present evidence to the territorial court. Hargrove, sensing the threat to his empire, escalated his intimidation tactics accordingly. In late July, the situation came to a head when one of the association members, a man named Cooper who had been particularly vocal in his opposition to Hargrove, was ambushed on the road from Pine Creek. He survived the attack, but was badly injured, his assailants making it clear that the beating was a message from Hargrove to the entire association. An emergency meeting was called, held at the Sullivans' homestead, for security reasons. Emma, with Rose sleeping in a basket nearby, listened as the members debated their next steps. "We should postpone the court filing," Jensen argued, fear evident in his voice. "Give things time to cool down." "That's exactly what Hargrove wants," countered Mrs. Fitzgerald, a widow who ran a small sheep ranch to the south. "If we back down now, we'll never regain momentum." The discussion grew heated, with some members favoring caution while others pushed for immediate action. Sully, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "Cooper knew the risks," he said, his voice cutting through the arguments. "We all do. But if we let Hargrove intimidate us now, he wins not just against the association, but against every small landowner in the territory." His words carried weight, reminding everyone of what was at stake. Emma, watching her husband from across the room, felt a surge of pride in his quiet leadership. "Sully's right," she added, rising to her feet. "We've come too far to turn back now. Mr. Parkman believes our case is strong enough to bring before the court. We owe it to ourselves and to each other to see this through." Her gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of each person present. "When I lost my homestead to Hargrove's men, I thought I had lost everything," she continued. But I found something I hadn't expected, not just a new home with Sully, but a community willing to stand together against injustice. She moved to the basket where Rose slept, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's back. I want my daughter to grow up in a territory where people like us, people who work the land with our own hands, have a fair chance. Where men like Hargrove can't simply take what they want through intimidation and violence. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. By the end of the meeting, the association had voted to proceed with the court filing as planned, with additional precautions for the safety of all members. As the last of their guests departed, Sully joined Emma on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist as they watched the wagons and riders disperse into the gathering dusk. "That was quite a speech," he observed, pride evident in his voice. Emma leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I meant every word," she said, "especially the part about what I found after losing my homestead." Sully pressed a kiss to her temple. "I found something too, you know," he reminded her. "A partner. A purpose beyond just surviving." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. From inside the cabin came Rose's soft cry, signaling her awakening. "I'll get her," Sully said, giving Emma's waist a gentle squeeze before heading inside. Emma remained on the porch a moment longer, savoring the peace of the summer evening while acknowledging the challenges that lay ahead. The confrontation with Hargrove was building towards some kind of resolution, for better or worse. But whatever came, she knew she and Sully would face it together, with the strength they had found in each other and in the community they had helped build. The territorial court hearing was scheduled for mid-August in Cheyenne. As secretary of the association, Emma was required to testify, presenting the detailed records she had kept of Hargrove's activities over the past year. The prospect of leaving Rose, even for the few days the trip would require, filled her with anxiety. "She'll be fine with Mrs. Jensen," Sully assured her as they prepared for the journey, "and will only be gone 4 days at most." Emma nodded, knowing he was right but finding it difficult to reconcile herself to the separation nonetheless. At 3 months old, Rose had never been apart from either of her parents for more than a few hours. "It's not just that," she admitted as she packed the documents they would need for the hearing. "I'm worried about what Hargrove might do if the court rules against him. He's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully." Sully's expression grew serious. "No, he's not," he agreed. "But we've taken precautions. The association members are watching out for each other, and Parkman has arranged for extra security at the courthouse." The journey to Cheyenne was uneventful, though Emma found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Hargrove's men following them. The territorial capital was larger and more developed than she had anticipated, with proper streets and substantial buildings that made Pine Creek look like the frontier outpost it was. The court hearing itself was a tense affair. Lawyer Parkman presented the association's case methodically, introducing evidence of forged deeds, witness testimonies of intimidation, and documentation of suspicious fires and property damage. Emma testified about her own experience, describing the night Hargrove's men had burned her homestead with a composure that belied the anger and grief the memory still evoked. Hargrove, represented by an expensive lawyer from Denver, presented a facade of injured innocence, claiming that the association's accusations were nothing more than the bitter complaints of failing homesteaders looking for someone to blame for their own shortcomings. The territorial judge, a stern-faced man named Hollister, listened to both sides with impassive attention, giving no indication of his leanings. At the end of the second day, he announced that he would consider the evidence and deliver his ruling the following morning. That night, as Emma and Sully sat in their modest hotel room, the tension of the past 2 days caught up with them. Emma found herself weeping suddenly, overwhelmed by the combination of worry for Rose, the stress of the hearing, and the resurfaced trauma of losing her homestead. Sully gathered her into his arms, his strength a bulwark against her distress. "It's all right," he murmured, stroking her hair. "Let it out." "I'm sorry," Emma said when she had calmed somewhat. "I don't know what came over me." "You don't need to apologize," Sully replied, his voice gentle. "You've been carrying this burden for a long time, Emma. The fear, the anger, the loss. It has to come out somehow." Emma nodded against his chest, grateful as always for his understanding. "What if we lose tomorrow?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been haunting her. "What if Hargrove walks away untouched and all of this was for nothing?" Sully was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Then we keep fighting," he said finally. "In other ways, perhaps, but we don't give up." His resolve steadied her, as it had so many times before. "You're right," she agreed, straightening and wiping the last of her tears away. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." The following morning, they arrived at the courthouse to find it crowded with spectators, news of the case having spread throughout the territory. Emma was heartened to see many of the association members present, having made the journey to Cheyenne to show their support. Judge Hollister entered the courtroom at precisely 9 o'clock, his expression giving nothing away as he took his seat at the bench. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat and began to speak. Having reviewed the evidence presented by both parties in this matter, he began in a dry, measured tone. "I find that there is substantial proof of improper and illegal activities on the part of Mr. Thaddeus Hargrove and his associates." A murmur ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's stern look. Emma reached for Sully's hand, scarcely daring to hope as Hollister continued. "The documentation provided by the Wyoming Homesteaders Association clearly demonstrates a pattern of intimidation, fraud, and destruction of property that cannot be ignored or excused. Mr. Hargrove's claim that these incidents were coincidental or fabricated is not credible in light of the overwhelming testimony to the contrary." Hargrove, seated at the defense table, visibly paled as the judge's ruling became clear. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something in his ear, but Hargrove shook him off with an angry gesture. "Therefore," Judge Hollister continued, "I am ordering an immediate investigation into all land transactions involving Mr. Hargrove's company over the past 5 years. Any deeds found to be obtained through fraudulent means will be nullified, with rightful ownership restored to the original claimants where possible." Emma squeezed Sully's hand, her heart pounding with a mixture of vindication and disbelief. They had won not just for themselves, but for all the homesteaders who had suffered under Hargrove's predatory practices. "Furthermore," the judge added, his gaze fixing on Hargrove, "I am referring evidence of criminal wrongdoing to the U.S. Marshal's Office for potential prosecution. Mr. Hargrove, you would be well advised to cooperate fully with these investigations." The courtroom erupted in conversation as the judge concluded his ruling, the members of the association embracing each other in celebration. Emma found herself enveloped in Sully's arms, his usually stoic expression transformed by a grin of pure joy. "We did it," she breathed, scarcely able to believe it was real. "You did it," Sully corrected, pride shining in his eyes. "Your records, your testimony, they made all the difference." Before Emma could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers, each eager to express their gratitude and share in the moment of triumph. Through the crowd, Emma caught sight of Hargrove being led away by his lawyer, his face a mask of fury as he glared in her direction. Despite their victory, a chill ran down her spine at that look. Hargrove had been defeated legally, but a man accustomed to power and its exercise would not easily accept such a public humiliation. "We should head home," she said to Sully, suddenly anxious to be back at their homestead, to hold Rose in her arms and put this chapter behind them. Sully nodded, sensing her unease. "We'll leave first thing in the morning," he promised. The journey back to Pine Creek was marked by a cautious optimism. News of the ruling had preceded them, and they were greeted with congratulations at every stop along the way. Yet Emma couldn't fully shake her anxiety until they crested the final ridge and saw their cabin in the distance. Smoke rising from the chimney, a sign that Mrs. Jensen was there with Rose, as arranged. Their reunion with their daughter was joyful, the baby seeming to have grown noticeably in the few days they had been apart. Mrs. Jensen reported that Rose had been a perfect angel, though she had certainly missed her parents. "She has your temperament," the older woman told Sully with a knowing smile. "Quiet, observant, only fussing when there's good reason to." As life returned to normal in the days following the court victory, Emma began to relax, her fears about Hargrove's retaliation gradually receding. Reports from town indicated that the land baron had retreated to his main ranch, maintaining a low profile as the investigations into his business dealings progressed. Autumn arrived with its brilliant colors and crisp mornings, the homestead's routines shifting with the changing season. There was the harvest to bring in, preserves to put up for winter, repairs to make before the snow came. Rose continued to grow and develop, bringing new joys with each milestone: her first deliberate smile, her growing interest in the world around her, her attempts to roll over and reach for objects. One evening in late October, as Emma sat on the porch watching the sunset with Rose in her arms, Sully joined them, his expression thoughtful as he settled beside them on the bench. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice carrying that particular tone Emma had come to recognize as a prelude to something significant. "About," she prompted when he didn't immediately continue. "About Emma Anderson's homestead," he said, using her maiden name deliberately. "The one Hargrove burned." Emma's breath caught. With everything that had happened, she had almost forgotten about her original property, the land that had been in legal limbo since Hargrove's claim had been challenged. "The investigation has confirmed what we already knew," Sully continued. "The deed Hargrove produced was a forgery. The land is legally yours again if you want it." "Mine," Emma repeated, the possibility taking shape in her mind for the first time. "But what would we do with it? We have our home here." Sully nodded, his gaze on the horizon where the sun was painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "We do," he agreed. "But I was thinking, it's good land, your father's place. Too good to let go to waste." "What are you suggesting?" Emma asked, curious about where his thoughts were leading. "A legacy," Sully said simply, "for Rose, and maybe for other children if they come along." A slight flush colored his cheeks at this, though they had indeed spoken of expanding their family when Rose was a bit older. "We could work both properties," he continued. "Build something that could sustain not just us, but the next generation. A real ranch, perhaps, or whatever Rose might want it to be when she's grown." The idea resonated with Emma in a way she hadn't expected. The thought of reclaiming her parents' land not just as a victory over Hargrove, but as part of a future for their daughter, it felt right. A completion of a circle that had begun with loss but could end with legacy. "I'd like that," she said, looking down at Rose, who had fallen asleep in her arms, her tiny face peaceful in the fading light. "To build something that will last beyond us." Sully's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her and Rose closer against his side. "Then we'll do it," he said, his voice holding the quiet certainty that had been her anchor through all the storms they had weathered together. Together. As darkness settled over the prairie, and the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, Emma leaned into her husband's embrace, their daughter secure between them. From the ashes of what had been destroyed, they had built not just a home or a life, but a future that stretched beyond themselves, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its capacity for renewal. In that moment, Emma thought back to the night that had changed everything, the night she had been driven from her home, fleeing through the darkness with nothing but fear and desperation to guide her. How different things might have been if she had taken another path, if she hadn't seen the light from Sully's cabin cutting through the blackness, if he hadn't opened his door and his life to a desperate stranger. Sometimes, she reflected, what seems like an ending is merely the first step on a new and unexpected journey. And sometimes, against all odds, that journey leads exactly where you're meant to be. 5 years later, in the summer of 1882, the Sullivan Ranch was hosting its annual Independence Day gathering, a tradition that had begun modestly, but had grown with each passing year. The homestead had expanded significantly, with the original cabin now serving as the heart of a more substantial house that had been built around it, preserving the place where their story had begun while accommodating their growing family. Rose, now 5 years old, was helping her 3-year-old brother Thomas chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, their laughter carrying across the yard where neighbors and friends had gathered to celebrate. Emma watched them from the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their third child was due to make an appearance in the coming month. "They're getting along tonight," Sully observed, joining her with 2 cups of lemonade. "A rare peace treaty seems to be in effect." Emma laughed, accepting the cool drink gratefully. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she advised. "I suspect hostilities will resume by bedtime." The years had been kind to them both. Sully's dark hair now had touches of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But they were primarily laugh lines now, testament to the happiness he had found in family life. Emma, at 29, felt more settled in herself than she ever had, the hardships of her early years having forged a strength and resilience that served her well as a mother, rancher, and continuing advocate for small landowners in the territory. The Sullivan Ranch, which now encompassed both Sully's original homestead and Emma's reclaimed family property, had prospered under their joint management. They ran a modest herd of cattle, maintained productive gardens and orchards, and had even begun breeding and training horses, Sully's particular passion, and an enterprise that was gaining them a reputation throughout the region. The Homesteaders Association continued as well, though its focus had shifted from fighting Hargrove, who had eventually been convicted of fraud, and served 2 years in a territorial prison, before leaving Wyoming for good, to advocating for fair water rights and equitable railroad access for small producers. "Mrs. Delaney was asking if we're still planning to send Rose to the new school in Pine Creek this fall," Sully mentioned, nodding toward where the hotel owner's wife was chatting with other guests. "I told her you were determined to see our daughter properly educated, regardless of my concerns about her being away from home all day." Emma smiled at his teasing tone. They had discussed the matter thoroughly, and were in agreement that Rose should attend the recently established school, though Sully had indeed expressed some reluctance about being separated from his firstborn, with whom he shared a special bond. "Rose is excited about it," Emma noted. She asked if she could take Firefly to school. This referenced the gentle pony Sully had trained especially for their daughter, named for her early fascination with the luminous insects, And you told her, Sully prompted with a raised eyebrow, that she could ride to school with you for the first week until she learns the way, Emma replied. After that, she'll need to demonstrate she can handle the responsibility on her own. Sully nodded, satisfaction in his expression. They had always been aligned in their approach to parenting, providing their children with roots of security and wings of independence in equal measure. A burst of colored light illuminated the sky, drawing exclamations of delight from the gathered crowd. Jensen, who had become something of a pyrotechnics enthusiast, had prepared a modest fireworks display to cap the evening's celebrations. Rose came running to the porch, her dark hair so like Sully's escaping from its braids, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mama, Papa, did you see?" she exclaimed. Mr. Jensen made the sky turn blue. "We saw, sweetheart," Emma assured her, making room on the bench for her daughter to climb up between them. Thomas toddled after his sister, arms raised in the universal signal to be lifted. Sully obliged, settling the boy on his lap where he could have a good view of the continuing display. As they sat together, a family united in this moment of simple joy, Emma felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The path that had led her here had not been easy or straightforward. It had been marked by loss and fear, by struggle and determination. But it had also been illuminated by moments of unexpected kindness, of courage, of love that had grown from the most unlikely beginnings. She glanced at Sully, finding his gaze already on her, a warmth in his eyes that had only deepened with the passing years. Without words, he reached across their children to take her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a familiar gesture of affection and understanding. Another burst of light painted the sky, reflected in the wonder on their children's faces. Emma squeezed Sully's hand, thinking of the night so long ago when a different light, the simple glow of a lamp in a cabin window, had guided her to safety, to home, to him. Some journeys begin in darkness, she reflected, but with courage and an open heart, they can lead to the brightest of destinations. Her journey had led her here, to this moment, to this family, to this love that had transformed everything, a love born on a night when a woman was driven from her home, and a cowboy lit his lamp and led her to his cabin, never knowing that in offering shelter to a stranger, he was welcoming his own future across the threshold. As the final fireworks faded from the sky and their guests began to depart, Emma and Sully remained on the porch, their children drowsy against them, their hands still joined a tableau of the peace and happiness they had built together, one day at a time, from the ashes of what had been lost into the promise of all that was yet to come.